It's okay, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Leo, you reviewed the Fractal Design North back in December 2022, so why do you have the same case on your table today? And the answer is that this is a Fractal Design North XL, which has better support for 140mm fans, slightly more cooling, and it supports eATX motherboards rather than regular ATX. And yes, it does indeed cost slightly more. And so I lay my Fractal Design merch to one side and we move to look at the North XL. Clearly I have the black case, that means it comes with a dark wood finish at the front rather than the pale wood you get with the white, which is what I saw last time round. I have mesh, I had mesh previously. If you have a tempered glass version of this case, if it's black, the glass is tinted. If you have the white version, the glass is clear. So 4 different variants on the theme. Let's pull off the top panel. Simply pulls away like that. Again, loads of mesh. This is all about airflow. Main side panel. Now we've got a couple of screws down the side we need to undo. And again, you can see loads of mesh. However, the reason I was fiddling around there a little bit is that we have 2 more screws for this fan rack. Again, all this is familiar from the previous North. As with the North, so with the North XL. Off with that. Front I/O is on the top. We have 2 Type A's and 1 fast Type C. You'll notice gold contrasting with the black. Rather nice, that. And then we pull off the front panel, complete with the wood finish. And inside the front panel, we have a dust filter that comes away quite easily. And you will see inside the XL we have 3 140mm PWM fans. Obviously they're going to be fractals. With the regular North we had 2 140s. However, there is no fan at the rear, and that strikes me as slightly missing a trick. Turn the case around. 2 thumb screws. And off with the right hand panel. To reveal drive mounts, cable management hook and loop straps, and also a PWM fan hub. You will note it supports 4 fans, just like the fan hub in the regular North, and you will note 3 positions are used, therefore you have 1 available. Again, I'm going to say it, a 4th fan in the rear would make a lot of sense. On the back of the motherboard tray we have this double SSD mount, 1 thumb screw to secure it, and then you screw the SSDs to it. And down in the bottom compartment we have a hard drive bay, can accommodate either a 3.5-inch hard drive or a 2.5-inch SSD. So we have, as supplied, there's a second one of those, 2 hard drives plus 2 SSDs plus obviously M.2 storage, or if you prefer 4 SSDs plus M.2. Plenty of storage. Also worth noting, loads of cable grommets. Now you will note here we have 2 cable grommets side by side, and the reason when you go inside the main compartment is that this case supports eATX where the regular North supports ATX. So if you have an ATX board installed, you use these grommets which are close to that board. However, if you're using eATX, you use the outboard grommets. Also we have 1 more panel to remove. Thumb screw, pull, and away, and now we have full access to the interior. And let us take a look at the features of the case. We can install 3 120 or 140 fans in the front of the case. In the roof you can install 3 120s or 2 140s or 2 180s. That side mount can accommodate 2 120s or 2 140s, and you can install a single 120 or 140mm fan in the rear. That side mount is only for fans, so when it comes to radiators or liquid coolers, you can install a 3 360 or 420 in the front, a 360 or 280 in the roof, or a 120 or 140 in the rear. Those three included 140mm fans of Fractal design aspect, 14 PWMs, and they run from 500 RPM to a maximum of 1700 RPM. Let's get some hardware inside the NexXxos, starting with the power supply. I'm not using my tried and true Fractal Ion Plus because this is ATX 2.52 and I want ATX 3. So I'm using this FSP Hydro Ti Pro 850 watt titanium, reviewed by Alan, did incredibly well, and it's the first time I've used this power supply. And as we can see, we have the all-important 12-volt high-power connector. Sadly, we have a foreign power cord, but that's not a problem. In the accessories, we have mounting thumb screws. That's a jumper for the main power connector, and we have some Velcro straps. But it's the cables that I want. And that's everything that I require. Cables connected, and we install the power supply. Nice and easy. Next up, the motherboard. And we've chosen this Gigabyte X670E Aorus Xtreme motherboard, which is eATX. Processor is a Ryzen 9 7950X. Sabrent Rocket 4 SSD. We can put the heatsink on. And the reason we can do that is because the central mounting location in the motherboard tray is a peg rather than a screw hole, so we don't need to get access to that screw. I am using a Thermalright contact frame. They call it an AM5 secure frame. And for memory, I'm going for some incredibly pish-posh Corsair Dominator Titanium. It's their first edition kit, DDR5 6000, and that is Expo. And aesthetically, that is a beautiful match to the motherboard assembly.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
And the hardware goes in as clean as a whistle. And with the cables from the power supply connected to the motherboard, let's take a quick look at cooling. I have here an Alphacool 360mm ST30 radiator, and it goes in the roof without any difficulty. Slightly aggravating to me is you don't have a detachable radiator rack, so you're going to have to install the cooling and then screw it while you hold it in place. If we want, instead of a 360 in the roof, we could put this Alphacool 420 in the front. That's going to have to go the G quarters at the top, because if they're down the bottom, good luck hooking those up. But as you'd expect with 340 fans already installed, no trouble whatsoever. Choosing cooling hardware to go inside the NexXxos is causing me a few difficulties. And part of the problem is that I started this thinking, it's a huge case and I can pick any hardware I choose and that will be great. And this is not entirely true. So I have installed this Alphacool Nexus ST30 280 crossflow radiator in the roof, along with a pair of Be Quiet Silent Wings 140mm fans. That's no problem whatsoever. I could, as I said before, easily put a 360 in the roof, but I want to stick to 140s. We have 3 140s in the front. And then I need to put a pump reservoir in the system. Up the front is the obvious place to install it, as there are no dedicated pump mounts. I've chosen this EK-XRES 100 with a DDC pump because it's basically teeny. I'd initially been looking at this water-cooled D5 tube setup because it's a lovely piece of hardware, but it's somewhat chunky. And this is the issue. I can put this up the front with the bracket upside down like that, and the reservoir basically sits just in front of the rad. That'll work very nicely. Clearly that wouldn't work with the 360 rad. And the reason is really straightforward. If I take this Gigabyte RTX 4080, the blooming thing takes up the entire case. Essentially, the case needs to be a bit longer to accommodate a large modern graphics card and any cooling that you want. If you're installing an AIO, you're laughing. You haven't got a reservoir to worry about. Custom loop with this case, not quite as straightforward as I'd hoped. A smaller graphics card, and I've got this much space at the front. But modern graphics cards are big beasts. So there we go. Anywho, we have the radiator and fans in place. I'll install the pump res at the front, and I'm also going to install this rather tasty Alphacool core CPU block, which looks the absolute business. First I applied Alphacool's thermal compound to my CPU and spread it nice and thin with their spatula. Then I installed the block and tightened it down with the 4 thumb screws. And doesn't the finished result look good? After that it was time for the EK pump reservoir to go at the front of the case, and after that we're ready for the tubing and fittings. The reservoir has its first filling of Alphacool's TecProtect coolant, and once it's circulated I'll fill it again. And now it's time for the graphics card, which is this Gigabyte RTX 4080 Gaming OC. And the power cable. And we've got the width of my hand clear to the side panel, which is of course mesh. I just want to make sure that the cable isn't... Actually, I'll turn the case so you can see for yourself. Look at that. We've got clearance. And the cable should be fine. Okay, time to start the PC. So far so good. It's time for me to update the BIOS, install drivers, put a few panels on, and then I'll show you the finished PC. The Fractal Design North XL has caused me some confusion during this review. It's 5 quarters since the original North came out, and the XL appears to be very similar to the original, just slightly larger. And my conclusion after a bit of thinking is, this is probably the case that Fractal actually originally intended to make. The original North is a little bit on the small side. This is absolutely fine. It is not as large as the XL name suggests. Perhaps I should have called it Max or something. By my calculations it's 60 litres in capacity, and yet, as I've demonstrated, we're actually a bit tight for space in front of the graphics card. If you use an AIO cooler you're laughing, but if you want to go custom loop, this case to my mind is not actually quite large enough. And you may have noted during this review you don't have the option for mounting fans or radiator in the side position, either for intake or exhaust, and that limits your options. You are intaking at the front and exhausting through the roof. Obviously if you had a fan at the rear, exhausting to the rear, but the floor of the case, that's not for cooling. The side, neither is that, and that makes it a very conventional case. The price in the UK including VAT, we're expecting it to be 170 to 175. That seems slightly expensive, but these days everything is slightly expensive, so I'm going to mark that as a negative point, but it's not something I can really jump up and down about in fury. Now, as you may know from my reviews, I like to do different fan settings, and I can say at certain fan speed it sounds like this, and at certain fan speed it sounds like that. And in this instance I've been slightly defeated by the combination of the Gigabyte BIOS and the behaviour of AMD Zen 4. The Gigabyte BIOS, if you set a manual fan curve, the final point on the curve, even if you set a flat line, the final point at basically 100 Celsius goes to 100% of speed. And the thing is, AMD Zen 4 likes to run at 95 Celsius come what may. So even if you set the fans, and in this instance they're locked to 850 RPM, when the processor heats up, the fan speed goes woodoomf. So with a set fan speed of 850 RPM, this is what it sounds like with the side panel off. However, when the system's under load, it sounds like this. To put some numbers on thermal performance, running a combination of 3D Mark Speedway stress test and Cinebench 23 at the wall socket, the system's drawing 675 watts, 325 watts going to the GPU, 220 watts going to the CPU. With an ambient of 20 degrees Celsius here, the GPU is at 65 degrees and the CPU at 95 degrees. And the thing is, no matter what I do with the fan curves, that was the temperature, because essentially the thing is dynamic. It doesn't matter what I do at idle. When the system's under load, it goes bob, and those are the temperatures. So 65 for the graphics, 95 for the CPU, and that's absolutely fine. Let's move on to my pros and cons. Pros, the good points. The styling is very smart, and I like the use of unusual material, although in the past 14 months we have seen 1 or 2 cases now using wood. Still, it's novel and I like it. Secondly, the 3 140mm aspect fans in the front of the case have PWM control. Third, the front I/O includes a very fast USB Type-C. And fourth, you get a decent range of storage options, including M.2 on your motherboard of course, but you do have a total of 4 drive bays. Cons, the negative points. You don't get a rear fan, and I think you should. Second, that PWM fan hub only controls 4 fans, and at the moment I've got 5 installed. And third, the case can get noisy. As I've demonstrated under load, it really does get a bit rackety. I've noted here that the price seems a bit steep, but as I say, everything is steep these days. But this case seems incredibly similar to the original North to me. I'm not quite clear why it's more expensive, other than the addition of an extra front fan. £170 to £175, it's a bit much. However, the case itself, I consider it worth buying, and it's an 8 out of 10.